Graffiti is defined as writings or drawings that have been scribbled or scratched on a wall or other surface, usually illicitly and in a public place. The perception of many is that this is a relatively modern phenomenon, like the examples of urban art we see here. The truth is rather different because graffiti was around at the time of the ancient Egyptians and Romans and has been with us in one form or another ever since. The city of York has been around since Roman times as well. In those far-off days it was known as Eboracum and was the capital of the Britannia Inferior region. Later on as Jorvik, it served the same role for the Kingdom of Northumberland and subsequently the northern ecclesiastical province of the Church of England, a distinction that continues to the present day. York is also a treasure trove of historic buildings, dominated by the imposing minster, and most of the churches in the old part of the city date from the medieval period. It is in these structures that much of the graffiti from that time survives, rather than in the winding alleys and ginnels, known locally as snickelways, where more modern examples can often be found. The Church of Holy Trinity on Goodram Gate is no longer used for worship and is in the care of the Church's Conservation Trust. Originally constructed in the 12th century and enlarged several times since, Holy Trinity is a Grade 1 listed building, marked internally with discreet reminders of parishioners long since forgotten. Inside, the church has a real atmosphere of age, and the presence of all those who have passed through its doors over the centuries can still be felt. Sometimes they've left more physical traces of their time on earth, or even to mark their departure. This typical medieval gravestone does not display the name of the person it commemorates. Instead we see a typical medieval carved leaf design, and also the image of a fish and a cauldron. It is believed that this may very well indicate that the grave this displaced stone once marked was that of a man who made his living from the salting and selling of fish. Workmen have been particularly keen to leave their mark over the years. This latticed glass window may seem plain at first sight, but light etchings in one or two panes record details of the glazier who set them in place. Here we see that the work was done by John Burton of Stockton-on-Tees in 1776. Gravestones and even the signs of tradesmen might be expected in an ancient church, but there are also less obvious marks too. Here we see crosses carved into a stone surface inside a side chapel within Holy Trinity. Devotional symbols, or perhaps even marks of pilgrimage. The people who carved these crosses are long forgotten, although their unofficial handiwork can still be seen. A wooden screen in the same chapel shows more personal graffiti, dating back to the second half of the 17th century. One of these inscriptions is dated 1667, the year after a great plague swept across the country, and may well be a simple statement of thanks from or I for still being alive and able to record the fact. Of course, the jewel in York's crown is its cathedral, known here as a minster, and this beautiful building is dedicated to St. Peter. More than 200 years in construction, York Minster was declared completed and then consecrated in 1472, and its appearance remains relatively unchanged more than 5 centuries later. The largest Gothic cathedral in Northern Europe, as might be expected, has its own store of graffiti and symbols inscribed into its stones over the years. The passage leading to the chapter house, a meeting place for the clergy, is particularly well stocked, having been relatively little restored over the centuries. It is easy to imagine that this quiet area of the cathedral served the purpose of a meeting place, where people could find some peace and quiet in the middle of a busy day, or perhaps decide to leave their mark on the fabric of the building. Here is a rare example of a musical notation carved into the wall of the passage, suggesting that at one time this area may have been used for music practice. The style of the notation suggests that the carving was made during the first half of the 16th century and may represent a chant. If so, many years have gone by since the passage resounded to those notes, but they are still there in the shadows. The music may well have been associated to the work of the minster, but some of the other carvings certainly are not. This faint outline is in effect a medieval board game known as Nine Men's Morris. The general idea was to form lines of 3 tokens, removing one of your opponent's tokens each time this was achieved. The game has been traced back into the time of the Romans, but it is believed to have reached at the peak of its popularity in medieval England. Alongside this practical and recreational graffiti are more esoteric examples. These faint circles form part of a compass design, commonly found inside medieval churches, and are apotropaic, or ritual protection marks. It is widely believed that these marks are intended to provide protection for the individual who carved them, their family, or the area or building in which the symbols were placed. Apotropaic symbols take many other forms as well, including the pentagram, which is now, thanks largely to the Victorians, considered to be a sign of black magic. We can also find medieval inscriptions etched into the walls of the chapter house, and masons' marks abound. These symbols were carved by the stonemasons who shaped and placed the stone on which they sit, and were intended to indicate how much work they had done, and therefore how much money they should be paid. Hundreds of years later, they are now the only evidence left for the lives of these consummate craftsmen. Most visitors to our ancient churches are content to walk past the apparently featureless walls, focusing instead on the more obvious areas of interest. Many of the decorations inside these buildings were constructed to represent the glory of the church or the lives of its more notable worshippers. There are other sights to see, however, the marks of those common people who made their way into these holy places and left a mark to show they had worked or prayed or even played here. Their names are long forgotten, but their voices echo down from the very stonework that would once have been so familiar to them.